In the summer of 1219, scouts reported that the Mongols were approaching the southern end of the Sir Daria River through the Fergana Valley. The Shah sent a large force under the leadership of his son, Jalal ad-Din, to destroy the enemy. After a fierce battle, the Mongols retreated. Jalal ad-Din reported back to his father that the Mongol army was not nearly as fearsome as their reputation. The men looked haggard, their horses emaciated, and they seemed none too eager to sustain a fight. The Shah, believing the Mongols no match for his army, put more troops at the southern end of the cordon and waited. A few months later, a Mongol battalion appeared, without warning, in the north, attacking the city of Otrar and capturing its governor, the same man responsible for the outrage against the Mongol traders. The Mongols killed him by pouring molten silver into his eyes and ears. Stunned by how quickly they had managed to reach Otrar, and from an unexpected direction, the Shah decided to shift more troops to the north. These barbarians might move swiftly, he reasoned, but they could not overcome an entrenched army with such great numbers. Next, however, two Mongol armies swept south from Otrar, running parallel to the Sir Daria River. One, under General Joshi, began to attack key towns along the river, while the other, under General Jibei, disappeared to the south. Like locusts, Yoshi's army swarmed through the hills and lowlands near the river. The Shah moved a good portion of his army to the river, keeping some reserves in Samarkand. Joshi's force was relatively small, 20,000 at most. These mobile units hit one position after another, without warning, burning forts and wreaking havoc. Reports from the front lines began to give the Shah a picture of these strange warriors from the east. Their army was all cavalry. Each Mongol not only rode a horse, but was trailed by several more riderless horses, all mares, and when his own horse tired, he would mount a fresh one. These horses were light and fast. They could travel twice as fast as their enemy. Their marksmanship was extraordinary. Facing forward or in retreat, they could fire arrows with remarkable dexterity, making their attacks far deadlier than anything the Shah's army had ever seen. Their divisions communicated over great distances with flags and torches. Their maneuvers were precisely coordinated and nearly impossible to anticipate. Dealing with this constant harassment exhausted the Shah's forces. Now, suddenly, the army under General Jibei that had disappeared to the south reappeared, heading northwest into Transoxiana at remarkable speed. The Shah hurriedly sent south his last reserves, an army of 50,000, to do battle with Jibei. He still was not worried. His men had proved their superiority in direct combat at the battle in the Fergana Valley. This time, however, it was different. The Mongols unleashed strange weapons. Their arrows were dipped in burning tar, which created smoke screens behind which their lightning-quick horsemen advanced, opening breaches in the lines of the Shah's army, through which more heavily armed cavalry would advance. Chariots darted back and forth behind the Mongol lines, bringing up constant supplies. The Mongols filled the sky with arrows, creating relentless pressure. They wore shirts of heavy silk. An arrow that managed to pierce the shirt would rarely reach the flesh, and could be extracted easily by pulling at the shirt, all of this done while moving at great speed. Jibei's army annihilated the Shah's forces. The Shah had one option left: retreat to the west, retrench, and slowly rebuild his army. As he began preparations, however, something beyond belief occurred. An army under Genghis Khan himself suddenly stood outside the gates of the city of Bukhara, to the west of Samarkand. Where had they come from? They could not have crossed the Kizil-Kum desert to the north. Their appearance seemed all but impossible, as if the devil himself had conjured them up. Bukhara soon fell, and within days Samarkand followed. Soldiers deserted, generals panicked. The Shah, fearing for his life, fled with a handful of soldiers. The Mongols pursued him relentlessly. Months later, on a small island in the Caspian Sea, abandoned by one and all, wearing rags and begging for food, the former ruler of the wealthiest empire in the East finally died of hunger. Interpretation. The genius of Genghis Khan was to transform the chaotic Mongol speed into something organized, disciplined, and strategic. He achieved this by adapting the ancient Chinese strategy of slow, slow, quick, quick. The first step, a slow, was to meticulously prepare before any campaign, which the Mongols always did to the highest degree. In planning for the attack on the Shah, the Mongols learned of a guide who knew of a chain of oases across the Kizil-Kum Desert. The man was captured and later led Genghis Khan's army across the forbidding territory. The second, slow, was a setup, which involved getting the enemy to lower its guard, lulling it into complacency. Then came the first, quick, fixing the enemy's attention forward with a swift frontal attack, Jubei's raids along the river. The final, quick, was a doubly swift blow from an unexpected direction. Genghis's sudden appearance before the gates of Bukhara is considered by many the greatest military surprise in history. We live in a world in which speed is prized above almost all else, and acting faster than the other side has itself become the primary goal. But most often, people are merely in a hurry, acting and reacting frantically to events, all of which makes them prone to error and wasting time in the long run. In order to separate yourself from the pack, to harness a speed that has devastating force, you must be organized and strategic. First, you prepare yourself before any action, scanning your enemy for weaknesses. Then you find a way to get your opponents to underestimate you, to lower their guard. When you strike unexpectedly, they will freeze up. When you hit again, it is from the side and out of nowhere. It is the unanticipated blow that makes the biggest impact. Keys to warfare. In May 1940, the German army invaded France and the Low Countries using a new form of warfare, the Blitzkrieg. Advancing with incredible speed, the Germans coordinated tanks and aeroplanes in an attack that culminated in one of the quickest and most devastating victories in military history. The success of the Blitzkrieg was largely due to the Allies' static, rigid defense, similar to the Shah's defense against the Mongols. When the Germans breached this defense, the Allies could not adjust or react in time. The Germans advanced faster than their enemy could process what was happening. By the time the Allies decided upon a counter-strategy, it was too late. Conditions had changed. They were always a step behind. Now, more than ever, we find ourselves dealing with people who are defensive and cautious, who begin any action from a static position. The reason is simple. The pace of modern life is increasingly growing faster, full of distractions, annoyances, and interruptions. The natural response for many is to retreat inward, to erect psychological walls against the harsh realities of modern life. People hate the feeling of being rushed and are terrified of making a mistake. They unconsciously try to slow things down by taking longer to make decisions, being non-committal, defensive, and cautious. Blitzkrieg warfare, adapted for daily combat, is the perfect strategy for these times. While those around you remain defensive and immobile, you surprise them with sudden and decisive action, forcing them to act before they are ready. They cannot respond, as they usually do, by being elusive or cautious. They will most likely become emotional and react imprudently. You have breached their defenses, and if you keep up the pressure and hit them again with something unexpected, you will send them into a kind of downward psychological spiral, pushing them into mistakes, which further deepens their confusion, and so the cycle goes on. Reversal. Slowness can have great value, particularly as a setup. To appear slow and deliberate, even a little foolish, will lull your enemies, infecting them with a sleepy attitude. Once their guard is down, an unexpected blow from the side will knock them out. Your use of slowness and speed, then, should be deliberate and controlled, never a natural tempo that you fall into. (15) Control the dynamic. Forcing strategies. People are constantly struggling to control you, getting you to act in their interests, keeping the dynamic on their terms. The only way to get the upper hand is to make your play for control more intelligent and insidious. Instead of trying to dominate the other side's every move, work to define the nature of the relationship itself. Shift the conflict to terrain of your choice, altering the pace and stakes to suit you. Maneuver to control your opponent's minds, pushing their emotional buttons and compelling them to make mistakes. If necessary, let them feel they are in control in order to get them to lower their guard. If you control the overall direction and framing of the battle, anything they do will play into your hands. The art of ultimate control. Control is an issue in all relationships. It is human nature to abhor feelings of helplessness and to strive for power. Whenever two people or groups interact, there is a constant maneuvering between them to define the relationship, to determine who has control over this and that. This battle of wills is inevitable. Your task as a strategist is twofold. First, recognize the struggle for control in all aspects of life and never be taken in by those who claim they are not interested in control. Such types are often the most manipulative of all. Second, you must master the art of moving the other side like pieces on a chessboard with purpose and direction. This art was cultivated by the most creative generals and military strategists throughout the ages. War is, above all else, a struggle over who can control the actions of the other side to a greater extent. Military geniuses such as Hannibal, Napoleon, and Erwin Rommel discovered that the best way to attain control is to determine the overall pace, direction, and shape of the war itself. This means getting enemies to fight according to your tempo, luring them onto terrain that is unfamiliar to them and suited to you, playing to your strengths. And most important of all, it means gaining influence over the frame of mind of your opponents, adapting your maneuvers to their psychological weaknesses. Control can be aggressive or passive. It can be an immediate push on the enemy, making him back up and lose the initiative. It can be playing possum, getting the enemy to lower his guard, or baiting him into a rash attack. The artist of control weaves both of these into a devastating pattern: hitting, backing off, baiting, overwhelming. This art is infinitely applicable to the battles of everyday life. The following are the 4 basic principles of the art. Keep them on their heels. Before the enemy makes a move, before the element of chance or the unexpected actions of your opponents can ruin your plans, you make an aggressive move to seize the initiative. You then keep up a relentless pressure, exploiting this momentary advantage to the fullest. You do not wait for opportunities to open up. You make them yourself. If you are the weaker side, this will often more than level the playing field. Shift the battlefield. An enemy naturally wants to fight you on familiar terrain. Terrain in this sense means all the details of the battle, the time and place, exactly what is being fought over, who is involved in the struggle, and so on. By subtly shifting your enemies into places and situations that are not familiar to them, you control the dynamic. Without realizing what is happening, your opponents find themselves fighting on your terms. Compel mistakes. Your task is twofold: to fight the battle in such a way that your enemies cannot bring their strength or strategy into play, and to create such a level of frustration that they make mistakes in the process. You do not give them enough time to do anything. You play to their emotional weaknesses, making them as irritable as possible. You bait them into deadly traps. It is less your action than their missteps that give you control. Assume passive control. The ultimate form of domination is to make those on the other side think they are the ones in control. Believing they are in command, they are less likely to resist you or become defensive. You create this impression by moving with the energy of the other side, giving ground but slowly and subtly diverting them in the direction you desire. It is often the best way to control the overly aggressive and the passive-aggressive. Historical example. By the end of 1940, British forces in the Middle East had been able to secure their position in Egypt and take back a good part of Libya that the Italians, an ally of Germany, had seized early in World War II. Having captured the important port town of Benghazi, the British were poised to advance farther west, all the way to Tripoli, allowing them to push the Italians out of the country for good. Then, unexpectedly, a halt was called in their advance. General Archibald Wavell, Commander-in-Chief of British forces in the Middle East, was waging battle on too many fronts. Since the Italians had proved themselves to be rather inept in desert warfare, the British felt they could afford to create a defensive line in Libya, build up their forces in Egypt, and launch a major offensive against the Italians by April of the following year. News that a German armored brigade under the leadership of General Erwin Rommel had arrived in Tripoli in February 1941 did not alter the British plans. Rommel had been a superb commander during the Blitzkrieg in France the previous year. But here he was under Italian command, dependent on the incompetent Italians for supplies, and his force was too small to make the British nervous. In addition, intelligence reports revealed that Hitler had sent him there with orders to do no more than block the British from advancing to Tripoli.